Get ready for the big revival. The real estate revival, that is. Now on 77 WABC, your New York weekend.
Get ready for the big revival.
It's Rand on Real Estate.
Look out!
With Greg Rand.
Welcome to the big real estate revival. This is Greg Rand on 77 WABC, Rand on Real Estate. And today we're going to talk about prosperity no matter what. I get plenty of feedback from people that are just downright mad at me for being optimistic and trying to encourage people to build wealth despite this darn great recession we're living through right now. Prosperity no matter what means that if you're going to sit here and tell me that, Greg, the next shoe's about to drop, we've got a government run amok, we've got a national deficit that's ballooning, we have states going bankrupt, what are you talking about? My answer to that is, okay, so let's say all that's true, and I agree with most of it. So what's your plan? Does that mean you're going to duck and cover? You're going to hide under your desk? You're going to wait for the government to send you a check? What are you going to do? Rand on Real Estate is all about bootstrapping entrepreneurship. We're all about focusing on the opportunities that exist in all circumstances. You know, we all know, and everybody repeats this statement, that everyone knows that when there's crisis, there's opportunity. And yet sometimes they dive under their desk and they hide when the crisis happens and they forget about the opportunity part. Well, we're focused here on the opportunity, prosperity no matter what. We're going to talk about what's really happening in the housing market because, like clockwork, the experts don't know what they're talking about, and this was no different this week. This was a banner week of disinformation about the housing market. We'll focus on that. And then a little bit later, we have a really cool interview on tap with a guy named Eric Belsky. He's the executive director for Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies. They've got an awesome report that came out, really comprehensive report. That if you look deep in there, you see that the great real estate revival is on its way, and that the short-term pain is making its way to long-term gain for people that have the vision and the wisdom to look for it, find it, and the courage to do something about it. But first, my favorite segment, smart people saying dumb things about real estate. This is my favorite because it makes me feel good to identify and point out rather than throwing my remote control at my television, which I did for years. And I was going through and breaking my possessions when I got so mad because the financial press and the general media press had so little understanding of the housing market that they got out there and commented on it in ways that were harmful to consumer confidence. And listen, at the end of the day, if what they're saying is accurate, then I'll bite my lip. But when they're saying is disinformation, not misinformation, disinformation, it's the opposite of right. It's not just off by a few degrees, it's off by 180 degrees. So we're going to focus on that. And this week, there were two indexes that came out this week. One was existing home sales and one was new home sales. And so the media went nuts. You know, we talk a lot here about the vocabulary of doom, where the most frequent words that you hear uttered out of the mouths of anchor people in the news are things like collapse, catastrophe, meltdown, free fall, plummet. Plummet is one of the best ones. If something goes down 1%, it plummets these days. Well, we're going to focus on that a bit. And I want to tell you what actually came out in the report, and then I want to show you what the geniuses out there in the media said about it. The National Association of Realtors reported that in May, existing home sales dropped 2%. The report also said that existing home sales increased 20% from last May. In other words, the April to May measurement was a drop of 2%, and the May to May measurement from last year was an increase of 19 and change. Okay? Now, what do you think the media focused on? Of course, they focused on the small drop. And it was interesting. I was on one of the news channels earlier this week, and I tried to explain to the people there that they keep repeating this bad habit of focusing on the housing market and looking at it through the prism of Wall Street. And the question I asked the anchor man, I said, give me an example of a stock that's doing well this year. And, of course, he gave me Apple. I said, so Apple's doing well. But we all know that while we're having this conversation, Apple's going up and down all the way. That's the way a stock curve actually works. It bounces around. It literally vibrates. And so there's, the nature of the way stocks trade is that they're trading and the prices are going up and down along the way. So I asked him, I said, if I told you that I believe that Apple stock was going down because just about 30 seconds ago, Apple stock went down, you'd tell me I was a moron. You'd say, no, the trend of Apple stock is obviously up. You're missing it. You're focusing too close. You're zooming too far in. It's like you're on hands and knees with your nose an inch off the ground, staring at the floor, trying to predict a trend. everybody in the room on the news channel said, well, obviously, Apple's doing well, despite the fact that maybe it went down an hour ago by a little bit. The exact same thing is true in real estate. April to May is meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. It's a little bounce along as the market trends in the direction it's going. It goes up and down along the way. The housing market does. But you have to stand back and you have to absorb the longer-term perspective. And the reality is that since October of 2009, the housing market has been booming. Okay, sales have been up an average of 20% every month from October of last year until May of this year. But that's not what you hear from the experts. So why don't we play a clip, a little collage here of some really smart people saying some really dopey things about real estate. Go.
Of the existing home sales for May came in worse than expected, down 2.2%. And that renewed fears, I think, of some sort of double dip.
Well, particularly bad news today, Margaret. We were expecting one last good month of housing, but we didn't get it. Existing home sales were forecast to rise 6% on the month. Instead, they fall 2.2%.
Can the housing industry rebound?
Some very weak housing numbers, a decline of 2.2% in the month of May versus what was expected, which was an increase of 5%. Let's bring in Dennis Gartman of the Gartman Letter for more on basically, Dennis, these lousy numbers. Double dip ahead?
Well, one gets the sense that in housing there may well be a double dip.
Existing home sales fell. Didn't expect that. Is this a double dip or not?
I love when they admit they have no idea what they're talking about. They open up with home sales fell. Didn't expect that. Well, we expected that, but we don't care about May to April. That's irrelevant. May and April are different. The only thing that's like May is May of last year. So there's an example of what you could have heard if you followed. And listen, I could have done this for the whole show. Just had one clip after another of double dip, double dip, double dip. And, housing sales plummeting 2%. It's just silly. It's the opposite of correct because in the exact same report they're quoting was the number of home sales being up 19.3% compared to last May. But they're not focused on the right things, and so they're creating this perception of a double dip. Reminds me of that old, it was Seinfeld, right? Didn't George dip his chip in the salsa twice and he got busted for a double dip? Well, these people, they share the award for the week here because they just it's like one person does the analysis and then everybody in the media jumps on the exact same analysis. They all agree with each other, and I guess they look around and see a bunch of people who agree with them. They assume they're right. And, of course, the extent of these folks' experience in housing is they live in one. So that's basically what they know about it, and they prove it here because they were 100% wrong about this. The next thing, and this has really got pretty hot this week, was that new home sales collapsed in May because they were down some 30-something percent. And what I want to tell you about this is two things. One, after the home buyer tax credit expired at the end of April, anybody who signed contracts in May missed the opportunity to get a tax credit if they had signed it a couple of weeks earlier. So not surprisingly, home contract signing, which is what the new home sales focuses on, people who sign contracts, not the house closing itself, but the deal being made. Those new home sales, I don't know who would go out there and sign a contract to buy a house in May if you could have saved a few $1,000s, that wasn't going to be sent down to Nancy Pelosi because you bought a couple of weeks earlier. The point is this. New home sales represents less than 7% of the housing inventory. Less than 7%. Doesn't make a trend. Nothing about that is relevant. You don't have to care about new home sales. When you hear someone talk about new home sales, shut them off. Because it's like me saying that purple home sales have gone down, and that somehow is an indicator of what the market is doing. Anyway, thanks a lot to the experts for proving once again that they don't know what they're talking about. You shouldn't listen to them. Listen to me. It's Greg Rand, Rand on Real Estate on 77 WABC.